Carl Jung once wrote something that still gives psychologists chills today. The tree that reaches to heaven must have roots that go down to hell. What he meant was simple and terrifying. The deeper you fall, the higher you can rise. But here's what Jung never fully warned people about. When someone who's been to hell comes back, they don't come back the same. They come back as something the world has never seen from them before. And that transformation? It terrifies everyone who only knew the wounded version. If you've spent years being the one who absorbed everyone's pain, who stayed quiet when you should have screamed, who bent until you almost broke, then this message is for you. Because what's coming next in your life isn't just healing, it's a psychological earthquake. The people who hurt you, the ones who mistook your silence for surrender, are about to experience something Jung documented, but few people talk about. The return of the integrated shadow. And when that shadow returns with consciousness attached to it, it doesn't ask for permission anymore. Today, I'm going to show you exactly why your comeback will be the most terrifying thing certain people ever witness. Not because you'll seek revenge, but because you'll become completely unreachable to the tactics that once destroyed you. Let me ask you something Jung would ask. What happens when the person everyone used as an emotional dumping ground decides they're done absorbing and starts reflecting? The world is filled with people who saw your kindness and mistook it for stupidity. They watched you cry and thought they had broken you. They saw you retreat into silence and assumed they had won. Every toxic person, every manipulator, every energy vampire in your life made the same fatal miscalculation. They thought your wound was your identity. They believed the hurt version of you was the real version of you. They had no idea they were watching a caterpillar and calling it weak because it couldn't fly yet. Jung spent decades studying this exact pattern. He documented case after case of people who went through what he called the dark night of the soul, a complete psychological breakdown that looked like destruction from the outside, but was actually reconstruction. And here's what he discovered that changes everything. The people who go lowest often rise highest, but not in the way anyone expects. They don't come back soft and forgiving. They come back precise and unmovable. Think about every person who hurt you during your lowest point. The friend who abandoned you when you needed support. The family member who kicked you when you were down. The partner who betrayed you when you were vulnerable. Every single one of them made the same assumption. They thought your capacity to feel deeply was a weakness. They thought your empathy was a flaw. They thought your silence meant you had accepted defeat. But here's what Jung understood that they never will. Silence isn't always submission. Sometimes silence is observation. Sometimes retreat isn't defeat. It's preparation. While they were celebrating what they thought was your destruction, you were in what Jung called the incubation period. You were in the cocoon, and they mistook your transformation for your death. The psychological term for what you went through is the night sea journey. Jung borrowed this from ancient mythology. The hero gets swallowed by the whale, descends into darkness, and emerges transformed. But most people miss the crucial detail of this journey. The hero doesn't come back to make peace with the whale. The hero comes back as someone the whale can never swallow again. That's you now. You're not the same person who got hurt. You're the version of yourself that can't be hurt the same way twice. Here's where it gets interesting from a psychological standpoint. While you were silent, while you were healing, while everyone thought you were broken, something was happening in your unconscious mind that Jung called shadow integration. Your shadow isn't evil. Your shadow is every part of yourself you were taught to suppress. Your anger, your boundaries, your ability to say no, your capacity to walk away without explanation, your willingness to let people face the consequences of how they treated you. For years, maybe decades, you kept that shadow locked away because you were taught that good people don't get angry, don't set hard boundaries, don't cut people off, don't stop caring. You were taught that your value came from how much you could tolerate, so you tolerated everything. You absorbed everyone's dysfunction. You made yourself smaller so others could feel bigger. You carried everyone's emotional baggage while they criticized you for moving too slowly under the weight. But something happened during your darkest period. You met your shadow, and instead of being afraid of it, instead of pushing it back down, you did something that changes everything. You integrated it. You looked at your anger and said, "You're not my enemy, you're my protection." You looked at your boundaries and said, "You're not mean, you're necessary." You looked at your capacity to cut people off and said, "You're not cold, you're wise." Jung called this integration individuation, becoming whole by accepting all parts of yourself, even the parts society told you to hide. And here's what makes this process so powerful and so terrifying to certain people. Once you integrate your shadow, you become psychologically complete. You're no longer operating from just your light side. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. Trying to be good enough for people who will never appreciate you. You're operating from your whole self, light and dark, soft and sharp, kind and unmovable. The version of you that's coming back isn't trying to prove anything. That's what makes it so powerful. The old you would have written paragraphs explaining yourself. The new you doesn't explain. The old you would have apologized for things you didn't do wrong. The new you doesn't apologize for existing. The old you needed people to understand your perspective. The new you doesn't need anyone's understanding or approval. And this is precisely why your comeback will terrify everyone who only knew the wounded you. They built their entire relationship with you on your willingness to shrink. They got comfortable with a version of you that absorbed their toxicity without reflection. They weaponized your empathy. They exploited your forgiveness. They mistook your patience for permission to treat you however they wanted. But now when they look at you, something's different. They can't quite name it, but they feel it. You're not reactive anymore, which unsettles them because they were counting on your reactions. You're not explaining yourself anymore, which frustrates them because they were counting on you defending yourself while they attacked. You're not chasing their approval anymore, which terrifies them because your need for their approval was their power over you. Jung documented this phenomenon extensively. He noticed that when someone individuates, when they become psychologically whole, they emit a different energy. It's not aggressive. It's not mean. It's just solid, unmovable. There's no cracks for manipulation to slip through anymore. There's no buttons to push because you disconnected them all. And to people who only knew how to relate to you through control, through guilt, through manipulation, this new version of you feels like a stranger they can't control, and that's what terrifies them. Let me tell you exactly what they're experiencing when they see the new you, even if they can't articulate it. They're experiencing what Jung called the mirror effect. For years, you absorbed their toxicity. You were like a sponge, soaking up their bad behavior, their projections, their dysfunction. They could be cruel to you, and you'd come back asking what you did wrong. They could betray you, and you'd forgive them before they even apologized. They could ignore your needs, and you'd convince yourself your needs weren't important. But when you integrated your shadow, when you became whole, you stopped being a sponge. You became a mirror. Now when they project their toxicity at you, it doesn't absorb into you, it reflects back at them. When they try to manipulate you, they see their manipulation attempt clearly reflected back in your calm refusal to engage. When they try to guilt you, they see their own guilt-tripping tactics exposed in your silence. When they try to gaslight you, they see their own lies revealed in your unwillingness to doubt yourself anymore. This is psychologically devastating for them because most manipulative people operate in unconsciousness. They don't think about what they're doing. They just do it automatically. But when you become a mirror, you force them to see their own behavior clearly, and most of them can't handle what they see. So they do what Jung predicted they would do. They escalate. They try harder to get the old you back. They love bomb you. They guilt trip you. They play victim. They try to trigger your empathy by acting hurt that you've changed. But here's what Jung understood that you need to understand now. Their escalation isn't because they miss you. It's because they miss having power over you. They don't miss the relationship. They miss the dynamic where you were beneath them. They don't miss your presence. They miss your tolerance of their absence. They don't miss you. They miss who you were willing to be for them. And this is where your comeback becomes truly terrifying to them. Because the old you would have seen their escalation and thought, maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe I should give them another chance. Maybe I'm the problem. The old you would have convinced yourself that setting boundaries was cruel. But the new you, the individuated you, sees their escalation for exactly what it is, a manipulation tactic, and you don't react to it. You don't engage with it. You don't explain why you're done. You're just done. Jung wrote extensively about what he called participation mystique, the unconscious psychological bond between people. In healthy relationships, this bond is mutual and respectful. But in toxic relationships, this bond becomes parasitic. One person feeds off the other's energy, validation, or emotional labor, and for years, you were the one being fed upon. But when you integrated your shadow, when you became whole, you severed that parasitic bond. You cut the energetic cord, and now they're experiencing withdrawal. That's what you're witnessing when they suddenly come back into your life, acting confused about why you're different. That's what's happening when they say things like, "You've changed," with disappointment in their voice, as if you owe them the wounded version forever. That's what's driving their desperate attempts to provoke you, to get any reaction, even a negative one, because any reaction means they still have access to your energy. But you're not giving them access anymore. And that loss of supply, that's what terrifies them. The irony that Jung would appreciate is this. They created the version of you they're now terrified of. Every time they hurt you, and you stayed silent, you weren't being weak. You were studying them. Every time they betrayed you, and you absorbed the pain, you weren't being naive. You were learning exactly who they were. Every time they pushed your boundaries, and you didn't push back, you weren't being a doormat. You were gathering data about their character. And now you have a complete psychological profile of exactly who they are. And that knowledge is power they can never take back. You know their patterns. You know their tactics. You know which words they use to manipulate. You know which vulnerabilities they exploit. You know how they operate, and they know that you know. That's what creates the terror in their eyes when they see you now. It's not that you're going to expose them. It's that you could. It's not that you're going to retaliate. It's that you don't need to. Your indifference is more powerful than any revenge could ever be. Jung had a term for what you're experiencing now. Enantiodromia. It means the tendency of things to transform into their opposite. The person who was the most giving becomes selective about where their energy flows. The person who was the most forgiving becomes discerning about who deserves forgiveness. The person who was the most understanding becomes clear about whose behavior they refuse to understand away. The person who was the most accommodating becomes immovable about their boundaries. This isn't bitterness. This isn't becoming cold or cruel. This is psychological evolution. This is what happens when someone stops abandoning themselves to maintain relationships with people who abandon them first. This is what happens when empathy gets integrated with wisdom. This is what happens when kindness gets paired with boundaries. This is what happens when you realize that the most spiritual thing you can do sometimes is to let people experience the consequences of how they treat others. Now let's talk about what happens when one of these people, someone who knew the wounded you, tries to test the new you. They can't help themselves. Their unconscious mind needs to verify whether the old dynamic still exists. So they'll try something. Maybe they'll send a message acting like nothing happened. Maybe they'll show up somewhere they know you'll be. Maybe they'll try to use guilt or create drama or activate your empathy through manipulation. And here's where everything Jung taught about individuation proves itself. The old you would have felt that familiar pull, the obligation to respond, to explain, to fix, to make peace. Your heart would have started racing. Your mind would have started rehearsing what you'd say. You would have felt guilty for having boundaries. But the new you, the individuated you feel nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction. Just nothing. A calm, clear, absolutely unmovable nothing. This is what Jung called being centered in the self. You're no longer reactive to their attempts at manipulation because you're no longer invested in maintaining their image of you. You're no longer explaining yourself because you're no longer seeking their understanding. You're no longer defending yourself because you're no longer on trial in their court. You've removed yourself from the entire dynamic so completely that their attempts to engage you just dissolve into the void. And when they see that, when they realize that you're truly, genuinely, completely done, that's when the terror sets in for them. Because toxic people operate on a specific psychological principle. They believe that everyone operates like they do. They believe that your kindness was strategic, that your empathy was manipulative, that your forgiveness was weak. They project their own psychology onto you. So when you cut them off, they assume you're playing a game. They think you're trying to manipulate them into chasing you. They think you're waiting for an apology so you can have power over them. But you're not playing any game. You're not waiting for anything. You're just done. And that reality, that you genuinely don't care anymore, is incomprehensible to them. They keep checking your social media, waiting for some sign that you're thinking about them. They keep asking mutual friends about you, hoping to hear that you're struggling without them. They keep creating little situations, hoping you'll react. But you don't. Because you're not thinking about them at all. You're busy becoming the highest version of yourself. And they're not even a footnote in that story anymore. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that's exactly what's happening in your life right now. You're shedding every false identity you built to please people who were never pleased. You're releasing every trauma bond you maintained because you confused loyalty with self-abandonment. You're stepping into a version of yourself that exists independently of anyone's approval or disapproval. And that version of you, complete, integrated, whole, that's the version that terrifies everyone who knew the wounded you, because the wounded you was controllable. The healed you is sovereign. The wounded you needed external validation. The healed you generates validation internally. The wounded you was afraid of being alone. The healed you understands that being alone is better than being diminished. The wounded you thought love meant sacrifice. The healed you knows love means mutual respect, or nothing at all. This is your comeback. Not loud, not dramatic, not vengeful. Just absolute, just complete, just final. You're not coming back to prove anything to anyone. You're not coming back to get closure from people who never gave you honesty. You're not coming back to make them understand what they did wrong. You're coming back to yourself. And that journey back to yourself requires leaving them behind permanently. The most powerful thing Jung ever said about this process was this: I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And you've chosen to become someone who no longer allows themselves to be a repository for other people's dysfunction. You've chosen to become someone whose peace is not negotiable. You've chosen to become someone who understands that the people who can't celebrate your growth were never meant to be in your future anyway. So when they look at you now, with confusion, with frustration, with that fear in their eyes that they can't quite name, understand what you're seeing. You're seeing the moment a manipulator realizes their manipulation no longer works. You're seeing the moment a narcissist realizes their supply has dried up. You're seeing the moment a toxic person realizes the person they took for granted has become completely unavailable to them. And that unavailability, that indifference, that calm refusal to engage, that's what terrifies them, because it means they've lost something they can never get back: access to you. Your comeback isn't about them. It never was. Your comeback is about you reclaiming every piece of yourself you gave away, trying to maintain relationships with people who weren't maintaining you. Your comeback is about you stepping into the power that was always yours, but that you were taught to suppress.